So welcome everyone to, this is going to be the second episode in Pride in the Roots, in our roots. And, we're going to be talking today with Jean Kearns Miller about maybe some things that prior to social media kind of blew up. So Becca, I'm curious, what was the life of the great Becca prior to social media? Because you're all over social media every day. So what was your wonderful life like back then?
It was a lot more calm. I definitely had more time for my special interests than I do now. And I think, I miss it a lot actually, because for me, like, social media came about and that was great. And from the perspective that you got to connect with people all over the world. And I got to make friends in a way that was much more comfortable for me to make friends, right? And things like that. But at the same time, I just did a live stream today where I talked about the kind of fakery that happens on the internet and the stuff, and we've sort of normalized this fakery that we allow to happen on the internet, like only showing the good things and using a filter and all of that stuff. And I miss sort of knowing people for real, I guess, if that makes sense, knowing that the information I'm receiving is real. And so, of course, my dog is going to bark right now and going to annoy me this entire time, right? But that's what I was thinking about, is how, like, back then, I also had a small bubble of friends, but, we didn't see each other or talk to each other every day. Now with the internet, it's like, even if you don't live near me, I talk to you every day because I'm like accessible in that way. And it's that double-edged sword for me, which I'm sure it is for you, which is that it's work and play for me. And so it gets very confused in my brain. But I've been thinking a lot about whether or not I want to continue to participate as heavily in social media as I have been. But what about you? What did you do with your life prior to social media?
Wow, it's hard to remember even before MySpace what my life was like, and chat rooms.
Right? That's, I mean, I am old enough to have had a dot matrix printer in college. So like, that's how, like pre-internet. And so I really had to learn all of this stuff. Like I learned it. Like a lot of people grew up with it. I learned it. So I don't know, my life was really boring because I'm a really big introvert. And before social media, I was even more introverted.
I know I did more masking because I was making more phone calls.
That's true too.
That
Although here's the irony. Do you feel this way now that Zoom has taken over everything? Aren't you just like, oh, can we just have a phone call? Can I just call you? Can we just make it that instead? That's my new thing, is that now that we're on Zoom all the time, I just want a phone call.
I haven't joined you there. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's my last option always.
Yes. All right, well, let's go ahead and introduce our guest today. So today is the second episode in our series, Pride in Your Roots, where we are discussing the history of advocacy, really kind of getting to know the people who before social media were out there advocating for the autistic community, who gave us the very beginnings of a voice, right? And I'm really excited to have this person with us because, like, I was very influential on the choices we made about who we were going to interview. And so this person, her book is one of the first books that I ever read, and I happen to know for a fact was inspiration for Spectrum Women. And so I am excited to introduce Jean Kearns Miller to our conversation.
Thank you.
Welcome. I'm excited to share with people, some of the stuff that you got to live through and some of your perspectives on the community these days. I know Doug has his well-researched questions ready, so I will hand it over to him and let him take you on.
Well, following what Becca was talking about, the book that you wrote in 2003, Women from Another Planet, Our Lives in the Universe of Autism, which was, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but the first anthology about the autistic experience.
Yes.
Why was it so important, Jean, for you to create such an anthology at that time?
Well, it was about women too, and it's still the case that less is written about women than otherwise. There were a number of wonderful memoirs, individual voices like Donna Williams, who did such wonderful books. But we were all on listservs. You were talking a bit ago about what happened before social media. Well, the lists were it. Autism Network International, and the one where we did most of our discussing was Martine Decker's Independent Living Forums. And so the book arose just from our conversations. Somewhere along the way, we started to say, wonder if we could do it. Then we started thinking, we better do it and do it fast because we're going to get scooped if we don't get it out. And so we got to work on it. And I basically volunteered to take on pretty much the lion's share of the work in getting it done because I believed so strongly in it. But we were sort of puzzling over what are the generalizations that you might be able to make about life as an autistic woman, or how disparate are we? And I don't know if we got any great answers to that, but the book has some things that are common, like discussions of from our email list to the individual pieces that are grouped thematically, like motherhood or girlhood, or things where we could all kind of have our individual say. And it's kind of a reader to decide what seems to be the common thread.
And you know, with writing, you know, this book, or you know, creating this anthology back in 2003, the early 2000s, an anthology for autistic women, how do you kind of see what our universe looks like for autistic women now in 2022?
Well, I'm wearing my Autreat 1997 T-shirt. So I go back to 95 when I started in on the lists and so forth. And so that's a long time, that's 27 years ago. And so just now there are more very autistic younger women who seem to have a lot of savvy about their place, and neurodiversity is no longer something where you mention it and there's silence because nobody knows what to do with it. Okay, neurodiversity, fine, let's move along. But now it's become, and it's kind of gotten connected with the whole anti-ableism disability press and so forth. So there are more resources for women now. And I think there's a lot more self-confidence, I would say, that I observe.
As you were saying it, I was thinking about how, so that was 2003 when that book came out. I would not get diagnosed for another 9 years from when that book came out, but I read it because there was still not that much about women 9 years later from that book.
Yes.
Right. And so when I got diagnosed, everyone, not only were people excited to find me, right? I was like this unicorn in the haystack, right? And it was like this crazy thing. But then the more that I looked for help or support or community or any of those things, the more mad I got that there wasn't anything, right? And so, and for me, I feel very similar to you. I'm now, it'll be 10 years for me in a couple of days that I'm diagnosed, and everything is different to me. There are so many women, there are so many voices, there's so much resources that it's crazy to me.
Yeah.
Jean, the three of us are certainly very familiar with Autreat, but for maybe some younger advocates out there listening that have never, don't know what Autreat is, can you tell them a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, it was an attempt to see if autists and their allies could have shared physical space as well as online the online experience. And it was really quite amazing. I went back in 2004, and I can't remember when Jim Sinclair stopped running it, but it's a shame because it really was a nice experience. And you could actually control by wearing a sign how much interaction. Did you want others to initiate? Did you want nobody to initiate? Were you welcome? How welcome were other interactions to you? And so that was one of the things that distinguished it from other conferences and so on. But I didn't know what to expect in '97 because I was only 2 years into the movement, so to speak, and I didn't know whether, how it would be. But it's funny when you spend so much time masking to sort of make it in the neurotypical world, to say, well, here you don't have to wear your mask. It was kind of bewildering. It was like, now what? What's there when I take the mask off? And I still ask that question.
Now, something about your anthology, Women from Another Planet, that I think is really cool is the way that it was written collaboratively from a group of autistic women through email. While there are also poems and I believe essays are part of the book as well, why did you take this kind of approach in the writing process of the book?
Well, it chose us. We were actually just discussing, and it arose. It arose out of the discussions that were already happening. So it wasn't. It was integral to what was already there.
And I think there are many important parts of Women from Another Planet. However, I think the accounts of the women in this book about how they may be different socially from non-autistic women are really powerful. When you think about the interaction of gender and autistic culture, what would you hope that people understand?
Well, I know that women are really expected to be social and socially adept. And so I think men are permitted to be, to not quite get it right in social settings and so on. And also, I think women tend to recognize that we're getting it wrong. We don't know why or how to fix it or what to do about it, where there's kind of, maybe this is a way sweeping generalization, but it seems that male autistics are cluelessly humming along to life, where the girls are sort of aware of not fitting in a little bit more. Just they recognize, they have an intuition about what's going awry in a social setting. So, yeah.
And I wonder, I always think about this when people present that, which I tend to feel like is a fairly anecdotal experience that we have in the community. But I always wonder, is that about the state of autism and the gender, or is that really about how society raises its women and raises its men? Right?
I think you're right. I think you're onto something there for sure. Yeah.
Now, Gene, collaboration with your book and other projects like that, I think are so important as we're stronger when we work together. What's been your experience in regards to collaboration for the greater good of the autistic community?
Well, I think it's important, but for me it wasn't easy because yeah, I'm an introvert as well. And I also have a sense of not trusting social situations and it's sort of like I fear unpredictable social situations. Corollary, all social situations are unpredictable. So it was sort of an act of faith, and we all sort of, hummed along and got it done. But I think it was quite a commitment for all of us.
And as part of this project, Pride in Our Roots, we want advocates to learn about the people that set the foundation for what they're able to do present day. Besides yourself, are there any advocates that you think our listeners should familiarize themselves with that maybe they've never heard of before?
Well, I don't know if this person is unheard of. But for my money, I want to acknowledge Sinclair's essay, Don't Mourn for Us, because to me, along with Dr. King's letter from Birmingham jail, that's one of the top 2 essays I've ever read, and I taught essay writing for a lot of years. But it says it all about it speaks to the parent population, but it also speaks to all of us, I think. And I would say that would be sort of required reading if I were able to dictate that. Yeah.
I will try to find it and link it with the video. If I find it, Doug, I'll give it to you but I haven't read that in so long. It just gave me goosebumps that you brought that up, and I have to go back and read it now. It's been such a long time.
Yeah.
Now, for those that are watching or listening to this who haven't read Women from Another Planet, Our Lives in the Universe of Autism, how can they go about buying a copy today?
Well, it's available most directly from any online bookseller, but it's also available from the publisher Author House. I think there may be a little bit of a discount there. It's authorhouseoneword.com, but it's available and still sells a few copies a quarter. So you're welcome to buy a copy.
Everyone should go get it. If you bought Spectrum Women and you did not read this book yet, then you're doing yourself a disservice because you missed basically the first version of it. And so what I loved about their version of it, not only it was like you guys did a subject and everybody talked about the subject, but you included things like poetry and other things besides just the written word as a standard text. And I thought that was really beautiful. So I really highly recommend. It's like, everyone thought Neurotribes was an important book because we all had to go back and understand their history. And so if you're not reading the first books that came out, again, I say to you, how dare you call yourself an advocate?
Well, one thing that I'd like to point out about Women from Another Planet, which has a question mark after it, is that it was rejected by the major autism publisher, I think because it wasn't a P&P book, by which I mean parents and professionals. Mm-hmm. And so many things. Jim Sinclair used to talk about autistic people being traveling zoo exhibits to be pointed to and by neurotypical researchers and say, see, they're like this, poke them, mm-hmm. see what happens when you do that. And I think our attempt was really to reach a broader audience, mm-hmm. And reach each other rather than just serve the P&P community.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that you say that because when we did Spectrum Women, our original pitch of it did not include a clinician. they required a clinician to be on the book with us in order for us to be able to write that book, even just a few years ago, right? So it was the choice between, do we allow the clinician in to the story if it's someone we get to choose, if it's this, if it's that, or do we let the stories go and not tell them because we have to, right? And so we ended up being able to pick a wonderful clinician who we actually all really like still. But it was an affront to our ability as women to write about our experience, to tell us that we needed to be validated by a clinician in that book. And that's the truth. That's why Michelle is in there. And if folks don't know that, I open the window to you, like, you know, lifting up the curtain behind Oz, but that's how it goes down. And you have to make that choice. Do we keep, you know, the stories of women autistics to ourselves because we have to have a clinician babysit us as we write about it? But we didn't want to. It was important to say, you know, I can write about any of those topics in the book, and a lot of these women are going to sit here and shake their heads, yes. Right, we're all having similar experiences.
I think that brings me to a point that I'd like to make about, I have inattentive ADHD as well, and the ADHD world is markedly different from ours because practically every big gun researcher clinician has ADHD themselves.
Right, and they will admit to it.
Adults,
right?
Yes, and it's part of their credentials. And so adult ADHD folks are never marginalized, where it seems to me that the professional community tends to objectify us. And it seems that sometimes they seem really obtuse in the way they understand or fail to understand autistic people. So I guess I would love to see more and more and more autistic people enter the professions. I think it's going to be a hard slog, but the more who are from us, who can actually have a more authentic vision and understanding, the better.
Yeah.
So
I agree 100%. That is the battle that I fight as a professional on a daily basis, right?
yeah.
Please take me seriously, right? Like, please don't infantilize me. Please don't any of this, because it still happens. And I think, you know, that's the precipice that we're on. So on behalf of Jean and I, and Doug too, because I'm sure that he would agree, if you are a professional and you find yourself in a place of power, and you find yourself in a place of some kind of fame, or where you have any kind of following, right? This is the next phase for our community. This is how we move from community to culture, is by saying we own it, right? And so be open. If you've got it and you're in a position of power, own it. Because if people don't have an example to point to, they can't go and do it too. We need to be courageous and step first. And so, yes, please, we need them.
Jean, kind of like exploring this topic a little bit more, like what do you, when you kind of think of the future for maybe autistic women in particular, what do you hope that looks like?
Oh, probably more acceptance and I guess greater freedom of self-expression, so that you know, I think now I have a lot of neurotypical friends, associates, etc., who know that I claim to be autistic, but it doesn't translate into a difference in understanding me. And I think understanding is something that I think that all of us could get more from people we otherwise really feel close to. But there's this one thing that's interfering because they just don't really get it.
With that understanding, like when you've disclosed to people about your identity, do they are they asking you questions? Are they trying to learn from you in any capacity? What's been that experience like now and going back 20 plus years for you?
Well, some are. In fact, I'm going to be sort of putting together a church service that will focus on disability, and that will, that I'll be able to do some, we'll be probing some scriptural readings and whatnot. So that's a direct thing. But overall, no, no curiosity at all. Just, oh, well, and some will say, well, you're quirky.
Mhm.
Okay.
They soften it, right, in some way so that it's digestible for them.
Yes.
I think this is an issue that I don't understand, and I don't know that my autistic brain will ever understand, is the idea that directness is rude, that like being accurate with your words or being direct about your feelings and opinions is somehow rude, and that it's nicer to soften it, right? I don't get that, but to me, I think that's where there's no curiosity, because then they have to be direct and ask a question, and being direct is so uncomfortable for them, and so it never goes there, right? It's like we've said something that's made the moment uncomfortable, and nope, we don't do that in this like that, and that's what happens, I feel like, whereas we would prefer if they would just ask us some damn direct questions.
Yeah, it's that the idea that words, because I guess I have a whole book in me about neurological hegemony, but the idea that if I express, I always say, you would say to my students when I would talk about it as a theme, neurodiversity, I would say, person A, I have a terrible headache. Person B, oh, my head hurts, it's killing me. Who has the worst headache?
Right.
And in neurotypical culture, guess what? The person who dramatizes does. And so you have to embellish, or you're not understood. And that's really hard, because I'm sure that neurotypical people really do want that expression, but I can think of all the chicanery that's occurred, the manipulation that people can do, just by those embellishments. Why can't somebody say, I have a bad headache, and it's believed, and it's
right, just for being just
yeah.
That's the story of my life, Gene. What I just say, I have a headache. I don't want to use more mouth words or anything. Like
it's a headache.
I have a headache, and then it's just passed over.
No, you don't go around in front of your partner and be like, oh, woe is me and my headache, right? You don't do any of that.
No, I just go and get some coffee and maybe some Advil and call it
and move on with your day.
Move on with my day. Well, Gene, I'm sure we could ask you questions all day and all night long, but we really appreciate your time and your energy given to us today. So thanks so much.
Oh, it's wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And thank you so much for adding another voice to our advocacy history lesson, I guess, because it's important for you guys to know that our community wasn't always this loud, and it wasn't always this convenient to be an advocate. And so it's important to know that some people fought some really big battles for us. And so thank you for that, Jean. And please go and read the book, because what's interesting is that you will find yourself nodding, even though it's from 2003, because anecdotally, we know a lot about the autism spectrum. So thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.